Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the very first of our Desert Island Pics features. And tonight I'm going to be talking to Canadian photographer Andrew McLachlan, who sat waiting in our virtual green room. And we'll get to talking to Andrew right after this. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Good. Very good, thanks.
Yeah, do you like my fun little intro?
Yes, it was awesome.
I had fun putting that together today. I thought I'd have a little bit of a change off of the music too. A bit
Yeah.
more, happy, but I'll just, before we get introducing you properly, and you could sort of introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about yourself and your photography. I thought I'd just sort of tell people a little bit about the feature. I think people in the UK will be familiar with Desert Island Discs, which is the BBC Radio 4 radio show. But I guess for those that are watching from overseas perhaps haven't sort of seen or heard about that program. So basically this feature is sort of structured around that format, and the format is that they get in celebrities to talk about casting them away to a sort of fictional desert island, and what in this case it would be 8 music tracks they'd take with them, but they couldn't live without. But in our case, I thought we'd get photographers on to talk about 10 images that define them as photographers, and then we'll cast you away to a fictional island. I mean, in the radio show, they give you a copy of the Bible, a copy of the works of Shakespeare, and then you get to choose another book for yourself, and then you get a luxury item. So we'll have a bit of fun with perhaps your camera body, a 50mm lens, another lens of your choice, that sort of thing. So anyway, we'll get to all that as we go through the evening. Should be a lot of fun. But Andrew, why don't you just introduce yourself to everybody, tell everybody a little bit about you and your photography and how you got into it, etc.
Okay. When I was a teenager, my parents had purchased a cottage up in northern Ontario, and I would often just disappear into the woods exploring, flipping over logs, looking for salamanders, canoeing through wetlands, all that sort of thing. And then when I got my first camera, I was about 20, 21 years old. That just sort of love of nature developed into, let's start taking photos of the animals and stuff that I'm seeing. And so as the years went on, I got a little bit more serious with it. I went out of photography a few years and did come back into it. Probably when I was closer to about my 30, I got more serious with photography. And I started out doing a lot of wildflower pictures, just native flowers in the woods and fields and that sort of thing, back when it was still slide film. And then I sort of progressed into some wildlife. And then I sort of found more of my niche with doing landscapes. And I started doing a lot of landscape photography, driving all over Ontario to as many places as I could. And after visiting a number of places, I decided it'd be an idea to put together an ebook on landscape photography
Yeah, I
in
saw that.
Ontario.
Yeah.
And it features over 100 locations with driving directions to each of those locations. And then lots of little hints and tips sort of scattered throughout the book. And then my wildlife has sort of developed over time. I would say I'm most primarily a landscape photographer, but when I'm out in the field doing my landscape, sometimes you encounter very cooperative wildlife. And then that's when I'll really just maximize those opportunities to get as many pictures of those subjects as I can. When I do specifically go out to shoot wildlife, things such as frogs, I usually only go out during the spring breeding season because there's just so many different species of frogs at the pools in the springtime breeding, and it's a lot easier to photograph them at the pond because you know where they're going to be than trying to look through the woods to try to find them. And then similar with some of the waterfowl, I'll do a lot of waterfowl in the winter down just along Lake Ontario in Toronto, because a lot of Arctic ducks will fly down to Lake Ontario for the winter and hang out there. So it's an opportunity to get a lot of different species without actually flying to the locations where these ducks nest in. You are granted going to get them in their winter plumage. Some of them have Quite nice winter plumage though. Some look a little nicer in their breeding plumage, but
Yeah.
yeah. So that's yeah. I just try when I do the wildlife, I go to somewhere where I know there's going to be pretty good opportunities to get something without having to really search
Yeah,
too
exactly.
much.
So you're picking your locations based on time of the year and conditions and everything else.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we used to the cottage we used to have. I'd see wood ducks up there, and you couldn't get within about 200 feet of a wood duck up there. But there's a little park in Toronto where the wood ducks they'll come right up and sit beside you. You can,
Yeah. I'm always a great believer that with birds in particular, there's always somewhere in the world where you can get close to a
yeah,
particular species.
yeah,
And I mean, for me, I've got 3 local lakes quite close to me, and in the winter, like you, I like photographing, the wildfowl on those lakes because
hmm
they're tremendously confiding. I mean, people are walking their dogs around,
yeah,
and throwing them into the lake, so
hmm
they're really used to people being around, and they're so confiding because of it, and so you can
yeah,
get really close. And
yeah,
if you get those sort of nice atmospheric winter conditions where you've got, lovely dawn light coming through that mist you get on those sort of frosty mornings, those
hmm
sorts of, I
yeah.
mean, it can transform, a normal scene into something quite
Oh
magical.
yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
people have seen some of the stuff that I've been doing over the winter, I think, on my Instagram feed. But,
hmm
and I have meant to say, if anybody wants to ask Andrew any questions, or me, come to that, as we go through the evening, then don't be shy, come on and say hello. I see Eli Porat's on already, and he says, "Hello, everyone. Excited to see some wonderful photos tonight." Yeah,
Hello.
you'll see some great stuff, Eli. Obviously Andrew's shared all these images with me, so I've got them all lined up for you. But we were talking off air, before we came on, about this way I feel affinity to some photographers because they have a very similar approach to me, and you're one of those people that, when I looked at your work, it's all about the love of wildlife first, and then photography second.
hmm
But I think that love of wildlife comes through, in the images that you produce, and we'll see some of that in a minute. Um, and that's I think why I was drawn to your sort of portfolio of work. And obviously you did quite well with wild art in 2021.
hmm
I think we've got 6 images in the book.
It was 6, yeah,
Yeah, 6 images in
yeah,
the book, and they're quite diverse pictures as well. It's not just one subject, and that's, when you see a photographer that, like you that is skilled with landscape, with macro, with birds and sort of active wildlife, if you like, that they've got a broad skill set and a great understanding of the subject. And I think one of the most important things with wildlife or nature photography, is an understanding of the subject. And if you have that, and the basis of that obviously is like, well, we were talking before we came on air, about our respective sort of upbringings as children, and
hmm
we sort of had similar experiences in the fact that we'd lose ourselves in woodland or whatever as kids, forget the time, and just be building camps, or as you say, looking for amphibians and reptiles and,
yeah,
and all sorts of things, and and did a lot of fishing as a kid as well, which brought me
hmm
close to wildlife on a regular basis. And that's that I think comes through.
hmm
So Eli Porat says, excited to see Andrew's Big Ten. There we go.
hmm
So should we get into it,
Sure,
and should we share your first image?
sure.
Which, and I thought we ought to share an image, of a frog first,
Okay.
because it just, those are the sort of first things that I think I saw from you coming into
hmm
the competition
Yeah,
last year. So,
yeah. I've
so
done a
let me
lot of
sh-
frog photography.
yeah, let me share your first picture.
Okay.
So Andrew, tell us a little bit about this, sort of the equipment you used to take it, how you went about it, and why this sort of image is important to you.
Well, this was done up Horseshoe Lake in a wetland, just about 5 minute paddle from the cottage we used to have up in northern Ontario, actually near Perry Sound, Ontario. And I would do a lot of these frogscape images using a 18 to. I use Nikon equipment, so I would use the Nikon 18 to 35, and I'd always shoot them from the canoe, and I would just lean out over the edge of the canoe with the camera sort of just at the water's surface, and then
Yeah.
use live view to compose and focus and create a bunch of different like frogscapes like that, where the frog is, it's quite prominent in the foreground, but then in the you can still see all the habitat that it's in. So I would do that quite a bit with the bullfrogs. But when I created this one, I had one of the Iwa Marine underwater housings,
Right.
like
Yeah.
a sort of like a, I guess it's a polypropylene bag,
Yes, I've
but
seen. Yeah,
it's
I've seen those.
yeah,
Yeah, they're sort
but
of
it's got
fine
optical
for
glass on the front.
yeah, fine for those sort of half in, half out shots, but you don't want to
Yeah,
submerge it too deeply, do you?
no, yeah. So when you did this one, I was using the Laowa 15 millimeter macro, and that lens, it's fully manual, but it will allow you to focus down to, I think it's 4.7 millimeters
Wow.
from the front glass. So you can just get crazy close.
Yeah.
To shoot this frog, I was probably about maybe 1 to 2 inches away from the frog. Um, so I had the 15 millimeter. I was using it on my D500. So we're a crop sensor. So we're what, about 20,
Yeah, 27, something like that.
20, about 27
Yeah.
millimeter,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. Um, So yeah, but because the lens is fully manual, I'd have to leave the top of that Ewa marine bag open so I could, put my hand down into the bag to focus it because it was a manual focus lens.
I can see an
Yeah.
accident happening. Yeah.
So I would sort of get the positioning, the right distance away from the frog, focus on the eyeball, and then just half sink the housing,
Yeah.
the element of the housing into the wetland, and would just shoot a series of pictures as I
Yeah.
was putting um, dipping the camera into the water. I would just shoot a series because as I would come up again, there'd be a lot of gunk in the water and it would stick to the element. So I'd have to clean the element off each time
Yeah.
and then try again.
Wow.
So I
It's amazing.
created quite a few of these.
Yeah, and presumably they're, the behavior of the animal changes at that time of the year, which is why you can get so close.
The bullfrogs, I could always get close to the adult bullfrogs, and those would be the ones that would be, maybe 5 to 6 inches in size. But it was always the little juvenile bullfrogs of 2, 3 inches. I could hardly get close to those at all.
Yeah.
They would just take off. The big ones would tend to just sit still, and you could pull the canoe right up beside them.
Yeah. And these are taken in the breeding season, aren't they? But, at the time
This
when
one
you
is
can.
actually in the summer. This would
Oh,
be
is it? Right.
but probably in July.
Okay. But
Yeah.
you do a lot of work in, I think, in the breeding season when they're a little bit easier to, yeah, in terms of the sort of
Yes. Yeah.
concentration of the animals, and it's a little bit easier to predict where they are.
Yeah.
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 Especially like for the smaller, the tree frogs and some of those ones. Yeah. And you can get the vocal sacs out.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
bullfrogs typically are in the big bodies of water during their breeding season. So I've never had too much luck with the bullfrogs at breeding season.
Yeah.
Other frogs I've had quite a bit of luck with, though.
But I mean, this is such a sort of, you know, almost a unique type of perspective, getting up that close and having the animal that that
Yeah.
prominent in the frame
Yeah.
and with the wide angle is quite
Yeah.
unique.
Yeah. I
Um,
think the
uh,
only thing that would make it better is if I had like a proper underwater housing with a nice dome port, so you get
yeah,
that nice crisp, clear, um, sharp water line. That was the only
yeah. Well,
drawback with using the 15.
that's only about $2,000 or $3,000, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, about that.
Got a question from Eli Porat. I'll put that on the screen
Yeah.
actually, so you probably see that. So, a question for Andrew: how has doing nature photography changed your life, if at all it did?
I don't know if it necessarily changed my life. I've always loved nature, and doing the photography was just a extension of that love for nature.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's really changed my life too much. Um, it did. I used to work for a company in Toronto for 30 years, until I got the 10-second thanks. We've decided we're going to do something different. You're about gone. Bye bye. So I had already been doing photography long enough that I decided that now was the time to just, pursue that full time. So that would be the one way that I guess it did change my life, because I was,
Making a living from it, and yeah,
yeah, I enjoyed doing it so much leading up to that point that when I no longer had the day job, it was just a matter of just switch gears and start doing this sort of thing.
yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Eli. It says anybody else has got any questions, then don't be shy. That's what we're here for. That's what Andrew's here for, to answer any questions you might have. So Rachel Piper says, "Love this." Hi, Rachel. Hope you're well. Yeah, it's and Rachel knows a thing or two about frogs. Right. Let's look at your next image. And this black-capped chickadee, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I thought I'd throw a bird in because we,
Mhm.
we had to have a bird.
Yeah.
And because on your website, in fact, do you want to put a link to your website in the chat, Andrew? At some point,
Yeah,
because we go through. But I
yeah.
know that I noticed you had some sort of articles on reflection pools and that sort of thing,
Mhm.
on your website, and I didn't know whether this was something that you'd done in the garden or where you'd taken this.
Yeah, no, this is in the backyard.
Yeah.
Most of my small songbirds photography is done in the backyard. I will probably set the reflection pool up in the next week or two because we're getting some spring weather's coming and some birds are moving through now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a blind in the backyard that I can put a little space heater in just to warm it up on the cold winter days,
Good
which is
idea.
kind of nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got the blind set up so it's about, I'm going to guess, about 7 to 8 feet away from my little like bird feeder platform where I set the perches up. I use the Nikon 200 to 500 millimeter lens for the
Yeah.
birds at the blind, and its minimum focusing distance is about 7.5 feet. So I put it,
Yeah. Know that well.
in
Got
that.
that.
Yeah.
That lens is almost permanently attached to my camera.
Yeah. So yeah, and I find the bird feeders when I'm out there, it's most productive when there's inclement weather,
Yeah.
whether we're having a snow squall or just some snow falling. If it's a clear sunny day, I don't bother usually because the lighting's just too harsh. So it's usually an overcast day, or more often, like I said, a day with inclement weather, and it can be quite active with a lot of the birds coming in. And
Yeah.
this was done on a day when it was snowing quite nicely.
And a little tip for people, I think, because photographing birds in your back garden, I think perhaps doesn't sound very exciting for a lot of people, but actually it can be a whole lot of fun, and you can really create some artistic images with it as well as doing sort of, I mean, I guess, want to call this sort of bird on a stick, but that's sort of, on a perch. But, for this sort of thing to get the clean background, that perch needs to be quite away from from the background you're photographing against. So you need to think as much about the background as you do about the perch and the bird itself and where you position yourself, because that really does improve images. So it's get as close as you can to the bird with the lens and get the bird as far away from the background as possible, and then you throw it out of focus. That's
Yeah.
the way, basically.
Yeah, and there's probably there's a row of cedar trees behind the chickadee, and they're probably about 30 feet back from the perch.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think at least 20 feet is what you need, isn't it? And
yeah,
it's difficult in my garden because it's not very big, for me to get the right place, to get the sun in the right place. Anyway,
right.
so
Yeah.
I played around with all sorts of different things, and people, I've been banging on about about various images I've taken, so I won't bore them again with it. But but you can get very creative, in your backyard. And if you haven't, if you wanted to know a little bit about reflection pools, which I know, are a little bit cliched, perhaps, been done a lot of times, but it's still a nice thing to do. And if you want some tips, hints and tips about how to build one, Andrew's article is fabulous. I read it the other day and thought, oh, this is great. Shows you all sorts of pictures of how to set it up. So go and have a look at that. So Andrew will pop the pop his website URL in the chat, but just Google him. Just Google Andrew McLachlan photographer and it will come up. So right, couple of comments. So let's just bring them up, shall we? Yeah, I've been sorting an area in my garden. Has great shots doing that before. It's Lawrence Doherty. Yeah, absolutely. And you can get so creative if you just have to think a bit differently.
Yeah. Well, the one nice thing with it is it allows you to control the background.
Yeah.
If you're in a park and you're shooting a lot of the songbirds, sometimes you'll get the messy backgrounds. So if you've got them around the house, by doing these little setups, you can control the background and get some really pleasing pictures of them.
And you can train them, can't you? You can train them to come in and do what you want.
Oh yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So it's just a bit of food.
Yeah.
Always the key, particularly when the weather's bad and they're finding it difficult to find, natural food. I mean, as
Yeah.
spring progresses and summer progresses, it's more difficult to get them in. But
Yeah.
so Rachel Piper, I'll put Rachel's comment up. Right, there we go. Well, you can see what Rachel's question is. So she's asking for some advice.
Okay. I can't remember exactly where that is in the province. Haven't really been through there before.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, if you can give Andrew a steer on the geography a bit better, then
yeah, just a little bit more
yeah.
closer.
Well, have a think about that as we go through
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
and yeah, we'll come back to you, Rachel. Right, should we have a look at your next image?
Sure.
So don't ignore the birds in your garden, people. There can be a lot of fun, particularly if it's difficult to get out and do other things. I mean, with the price of diesel at the moment and petrol, I guess a lot of us are going to be, working closer to home over the next few months. Right. Now, when I saw this, I fell in love with it. I absolutely loved it. I would have loved to have taken a picture like this. I just think it's fabulous as a sort of, my background is sort of more landscape photography anyway from a few years ago. I haven't done any for ages, but I just thought, the colors in this and the whole balance of it all, I just thought it was wonderful. And so tell everybody where you took it and the circumstances behind it, because we were chatting again off air about this image, and you were saying it took you actually quite a few years to get it.
It did, yeah. This was taken in Algonquin Provincial Park. It's along the Petawawa River, and I did 5 workshops up in the area. There around there's a big Algonquin radio observatory, big huge satellite dish, and we would photograph that against the Milky Way at night, and then do some landscape scenes during the day, whether it's intimate forest details, images across Lake Travers, which the Petawawa River dumps into. We're sort of near the mouth of the river here, and this is just on the Petawawa River. There's a bridge that goes over it, gives you a big expanse of the river, but then the river kind of breaks off and this one little side channel goes around, and that's what this is here, this little side channel. And in all the years trying to time fall color workshops, it's kind of hit and miss depending on how the season goes. But just this one last year, in early October, it just came together. The colors were just peaking really nicely at that time of year. And what I really liked about this, I had to sort of scamper. 2 or 3 of the participants followed me. We had to sort of scamper down a steep embankment to the water's edge. But once you got down there at the water's edge, that nice maple tree hanging over the river was just, it just caught your eye immediately. And it had been raining a bit, so all the tree trunks are, saturated and dark.
That's a really important element, isn't it, when you're doing this sort of woodland type photography?
Yeah.
The importance of a bit of moisture and rain.
Yeah.
It just transforms things, doesn't it? I mean,
it
it's
does,
just, as you say, it sort of darkens down the trunks of the trees. It brings the colors out, better in the leaves. It's just, you've got to have all those sort of things. Everything's got to align, hasn't it,
does,
with this sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, of course, a polarizing filter was used. This is with a 16
I was going to ask you
35
about
millimeter
that.
lens.
Yeah.
So the polarizing filter, it's going to cut some of the glare off that vegetation, off the water. It boosts the colors a little bit as well. And I just really like that all the royal ferns down there on the right side, the color, nice golden tones. It's almost mimicking the maple tree a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
I bet you sold a few prints of that, haven't you?
No, none yet.
No? Wow, I'm surprised. Well, there you go. Anybody wants a print of that, go and get in touch with Andrew.
Yeah.
No, I thought that was wonderful, and it's with my interest in landscape photography as well. That just sort of that sort of hit all the right notes with me when I saw that. I thought, oh no, that's the sort of thing I'd love to take. I've done a lot of work for a charity in the UK called the Woodland Trust, and it's challenging. Woodland photography is really challenging. Anybody who's done gone out there and spent some time trying to piece together compositions like this, it's, you know, it doesn't come together straight away. You know, you've really got to work hard at it.
Oh, you do. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very, very rewarding. So yeah, Ben Pullitz is on. Hi, Ben. He says, hi, wow, what a picture. Great colors. Yeah, that's what I thought when I saw it. I thought I was definitely definitely got to show that one. Rachel says, Rachel Piper, they're near Cambridge, not far from Toronto. We would hire a car to explore the area. So have a think about that, Andrew, while we're chatting, and yeah, see if you can come up with anything.
Mm-hmm.
All right. No, that's a fantastic. I would have loved to have taken that. I'd have been, you know, over the moon to have taken that picture. So yeah, lovely. Right, what have we got next? Oh, well, this one, of course, is in the book.
Yeah.
And it was backyard, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
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 And what I like about this image and why it stands out for me is, how the hell did you actually see it in the first place? I just love that. You know, I love the way it blends in so well.
Yeah.
You know, with all those lichens. You know, and it would have taken you, I would imagine, a long time to actually sort of find something like that, because the, you know, its camouflage is so cryptic that that's got to be a difficult. I mean, how big is this thing? It can't be that big either.
It would be, the body, I would say, was maybe about half an inch.
Yeah.
So not too big.
Yeah. So
but
I mean, how did you spot it?
Well, I live out in the country, just about an hour north of Toronto, and I've the last 2-3 years I've been doing a lot of macro photography just around the yard, mostly because, you know, COVID's kept a lot of people home, especially in the first year or so. So I would just walk around the yard looking for insects to photograph, and I use my Laowa 100 millimeter 2x life-size macro lens for this.
I'm gonna ask you about that lens, actually, because yeah, it's intriguing. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
And I believe I did use the Laowa macro flash for this, which is two flash heads on long extension arms, and I just make a couple little homemade diffusers for it, so it's not harsh light. But this, I've never seen these. It's a running crab spider. I've never seen it before around here, and I think that's just goes to show you, when you stop and start looking at things, you start seeing a lot of different wildlife, even just in your own yard on the tree trunks.
Yeah.
I was just looking, I've seen some other little types of jumping spiders on one of my old silver maples, and I was looking around to see if I could find any, and that's when I just saw this guy, and he was quite skittish and started running around the tree trunk, and I just kind of waited till it sort of stayed still, and then I moved in to grab a couple of frames. I didn't get too many more than about 2 or 3 frames before he was off and running higher up on the tree. But he was quite well camouflaged, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that lens, because, you know, that, I mean, obviously a standard macro, you know, sort of one, you know, life size is about as good as you get.
Yeah.
But this is a 2.5 times.
2 times life
Two
size.
times, sorry.
Yeah.
2 times life size.
2 times life size. And I'll sometimes use one of those Raynox diopters, the stronger power one, the DCR-250. And when you put that on the lens, you can get almost a 4 times life size.
Wow.
But I find the lens, it's very, very sharp. And as soon as I started using it, I ended up selling my Nikon one that I had. I didn't have the VR version. I had the older one. But I just thought, this is just way sharper than the Nikon. I don't really have a use for the Nikon one anymore. So I've been using the Laowa, even though it's fully manual. You know, it's got the aperture ring and then the focus. Not so much a focus ring. You sort of dial in the magnification you want, and then you just physically move in till you achieve focus.
Wow. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? I mean, we get so hung up, don't we, on autofocus and those sorts of, call them modern technology. It's been around for quite a while now, but you know, with all the sort of magic that happens, you know, certainly with, I mean, being a Nikon shooter, you know, looking at the sort of Z9 and
Hmm.
all the reviews on that and people saying, what amazing things that does. And of course,
Yeah.
with Olympus now, the new OM1, and
Hmm.
what Andy Rouse was telling me about it the other day. And we've got I will tell people about some of the other lives coming up. In fact, I've just swapped an email with Peter Bambusek, obviously another Olympus
Hmm.
or OM system, as I think we need to call them now, user, and he's been using the OM1 for a while. He's coming on. I think we're going to do a live on the 10th of April to talk about eyes and share
Hmm.
some of Peter's amazing work from the likes of sort of Costa Rica and
Right.
those sorts of places. So look out for that.
Yeah.
But I mean, all this sort of magical, wonderful technology, and then you're using a manual lens, sort of
Hmm.
going back a few
Yeah.
decades, really,
Yeah.
to
And
take. But it allows you to it allows you to enter another world, doesn't it? Almost.
oh, it does. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And one of the nice things is with the Laowa lenses, especially this macro. If we talk in like terms of U.S. dollars, it's $450.
Yeah,
And most the Nikon or Canons, they're up about 1,000.
yeah. I
You
mean, I
know.
can't. I mean, I bought the 105 macro for the Nikon about a year ago, maybe,
Hmm.
and I think that was about 700 or 800 pounds.
Okay.
So that,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would be about 1,000
Yeah.
or US, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
around about that mark.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
find
So
with
then,
macro, a lot of times I'm trying to go a little bit more than life size because it's not quite enough. So when you get that 2x, I'm shooting most things probably in between the one, the life size and the two
yeah.
times life size.
Well, I just think it sort of brings it's almost sort of monsters in your backyard, isn't it? It's that sort of,
Yeah.
you're bringing in details that people don't normally see, and I think that's that we're talking about sort of doing things a little differently. And when we're talking about contest photography, judges look for things they haven't seen before, and I think that if you're creating something which is two times life size, which not a lot of people do,
Hmm.
then you're showing somebody something they haven't necessarily seen a lot of, and then
Yeah.
those pictures have impact. And
Yeah.
that's so and this is what I went to, when I sort of did the introduction, and what I said about we jumped from landscape through to sort of two times macro work.
Hmm.
So it's you are skilled in a lot of areas of photography, not just photographing birds, let's say.
Right.
There's all these other elements to your repertoire. And I mean, would you describe yourself really as a sort of nature photographer, as opposed to, or do you not want to sort of pigeonhole yourself into any real box?
No, I would say nature photographer because,
Hmm.
everything, from flowers to landscape, mammals, birds, insects, it all appeals to me. I want to start doing a lot more underwater photography in the next few years and that. So I probably will get a better underwater housing
Yeah.
to start trying doing a little bit more of that as well.
Well, I mean, and again, that opens up another world, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
whole
I
new
mean,
learning curve.
how about underwater with the two times macro?
I don't know if they have anything set up for that yet because you'd have to have a focus gear on it, I
Yeah, I was
guess.
going to
And
say
I
that
don't
that
know.
would
Yeah.
that would be a challenge, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That
So
would
I
be a
might have to
challenge.
buy a Nikon macro to go
Yeah.
with the Z7 to go underwater, but
Lawrence Doherty says amazing camo. Yeah, it certainly is. I just don't know how you spotted that. But isn't it the way, if you sit, and I think this is a really good bit of advice actually, and this is something I've been trying to do with my own photography just recently, is just slow it down a bit and just
Mhm.
enjoy it a bit more and allow myself to enjoy it a bit more,
Yeah.
rather than sort of thinking, oh, I've got to be out, I've got to be out. The moment the sun comes up, I've got half an hour of really good light and I've got to get something. It's just like slow it down and actually
Yeah.
take your time. And particularly if you're doing something like woodland photography, just to sort of sit somewhere for 20 minutes, have
Mhm.
a cup of tea or whatever you're going to do, and just have a good look around you and allow things to just show themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they do appear. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Rather than
Yeah.
just sort of walking and walking and walking until your eye catches something.
Yeah.
You sit
Yeah.
down and it's amazing what actually appears in front of your eyes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't
yeah,
count the many times, you may be shooting a landscape or whatever, and you just sort of pause, waiting to see if the light's going to change or something. And then
yeah,
you'll just notice some textures at your feet that might look great with a macro lens.
yeah.
Yeah.
and do it. And I think, if you're doing photography for yourself as well, if you're taking, I think that, and doing things that please you, I think that's really important.
Yes.
And I
Oh,
think
I
that
think
then
so
that
too.
will
Yeah.
show in
Yeah.
the,
You
in the
have to do it
images.
for yourself first. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got a question from Scott Vincent. I'll put that up.
Hmm.
Okay, so Andrew makes good use of neutral density filters and other filters for his landscapes. Which are your favorites for photography?
I use I use Stingray filters, and I use the 3-stop reverse grad filter for my sunrise and sunsets. And for neutral density, I'm typically using my 5-stop neutral density, um, sometimes along with the 3-stop reverse grad, just if I want to slow things down a lot more.
Yeah.
If I want to speed things up a little bit, maybe I'll use the 3-stop. I do have a 10-stop ND filter, which I use very rarely. The only time I really use that is if it's you know high noon and it's you really want to slow things down a lot.
Yeah.
So I'll use the 10-stop for that. Polarizing filters pretty much on the lens all the time for the majority of the landscape work. I may look into, now that I'm using a Z7 for my landscape work, the dynamic range is a little bit better than my older D800. I might look into a reverse grad filter that's maybe not quite as strong, just because the camera can
Handle.
record much of that
Yeah.
information with almost without the filter, right?
And I think, there's a tip for people that perhaps, haven't invested in these sorts of things before, is if you have that high dynamic range, don't be afraid to shoot 2 or 3 frames and then blend them later. I mean, obviously for competition photography,
Yeah.
perhaps you might be you might be into sort of sticky territory, but if you're doing it for yourself, there's nothing wrong with doing that, because you're doing exactly what a grad would do anyway.
Hmm.
So if you happen to go out without one, or you haven't got one or whatever, then that's an alternative way of doing it, if you're struggling with the dynamic range that your camera can manage. So yeah,
Yeah.
good question. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Excuse me. I've got a few questions for you, actually. I wrote some down, and I've been I've asked him some of them, actually, has been going along. Okay, so what was the first camera you owned? You're talking about you didn't get a camera till your early 20s. What can you
Uh,
remember the first
in
one?
my 20s, it was Minolta X700.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine
I
mine
did
was a
have one
really.
earlier when I was 10. My dad used to work at Kodak, and the kids' Christmas party, as soon as
Yeah,
the kids hit 10, they got a little Kodak Instamatic camera.
I remember
So I
those.
still got that tucked away somewhere at the
Oh,
house,
have
but
you?
yeah.
Yeah, my dad bought me I think it was a sort of, it was a sort of store chain own brand
Yeah.
SLR, and it was better than some of the more sophisticated cameras I got later on. It
Right.
was it was a
Yeah.
great little camera. It was just fabulous. Anyway, I don't know what happened to
Yeah.
it, actually, but
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
my X700s, they never gave me a single problem at all.
yeah,
The batteries would last almost forever.
yeah,
Yeah.
incredible, isn't it? But anyway, days of film long
Yeah.
gone. For most people, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Shall we see what we've got next?
Sure.
Where are we? Get the right place. Now, this I found intriguing, and talking about sort of dynamic range. Talk us through this, and with a particular, I guess with a particular emphasis on the dynamic range here, and how you've achieved this image.
Okay. It was a single frame, using it was with the D800 and the Laowa 12 millimeter zero distortion lens. This cave, the location is Bruce Peninsula National Park up near Tobermory, Ontario. And some years, Georgian Bay will freeze over, and you can get out onto the lake and to access some of these caves and pretty cool ice formations along the lake as well. I think what happened on this particular instance, because all these ice boulders, and they're, oh, maybe a little smaller than a basketball, those ice boulders,
Wow. Yeah.
they're all inside the cave. So the only thing I can think of is maybe at some point the bay was frozen. There was a warm spell that broke up and pushed all this ice into the cave, and then it froze over again. leaving these sort of ice boulders inside the cave.
Pretty
But
unique, isn't it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
was able to get away with single exposure here because behind me there's a hole in the top of the cave to the sky, so it's actually letting some light in. We're not in a
Right.
really dark cave.
And presumably
Um,
some of that light's reflecting off the ice anyway.
it would be, yes, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And then I wanted to do a little higher perspective in the cave, but I went on a Saturday and there was just like hundreds of tourists all walking around.
Right. Yeah.
So I ended up sort of being forced to go with this really, really low perspective to get all the in the opening of the cave, there would have been all kinds of people's toques sticking up. So I had to get really low to eliminate all those people on the outside of the cave.
Yeah, and I love the
Yeah.
contrast of the the rocks and the the ceiling and then the ice underneath. I think it works really well. So what the lens that you use for this would have been?
The Laowa 12 millimeter.
Yeah,
Yeah, zero distortion lens.
yeah,
I originally purchased it for doing a lot of architecture. I do some architecture, not quite as much lately, but I still do some. But that 0D lens, if you keep the camera square to the world, all your interior walls and everything are perfectly
yeah.
straight. There's no
Wow.
no tweaking that you have to do. So I started using it a lot for landscapes, just for the one reason you can focus down to about 6 inches from the front element of that lens. So again, a wide angle lens like that down low, you can just exaggerate the foreground so
Yeah,
nicely.
yeah. Amazing. Incredible. No, that image really sort of stood out to me when I saw it. I thought,
Thanks.
oh wow, that's a pretty amazing situation to have come across and been able to photograph. So yeah, fantastic picture. Right, what have I got? Another question for you. Oh yeah, what's your favorite photographic subject? We were talking about the sort of diversity of subject matter that you photograph. Have you got a favorite?
Favorite, probably just simply landscape photography.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then
yeah.
just about anywhere. I've been doing quite a bit in the Cayman Islands lately. I really love doing landscape photography up on Lake Superior. There's just so many different opportunities available, especially if you go in like middle October. I do a couple of
Mm,
workshops up there then, and that's the onset of the storm season. So you can sometimes get some waves crashing on the shore.
yeah.
It's lots of fun.
Yeah, good use of your neutral density filters and things like that. Slow things up
Yeah,
and get some
yeah.
nice smooth water. Yeah. Okay, right. Let's see what we've got next. Back to our amphibians again, but slightly different. This one, breeding season, I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
yeah.
with
That's
it
a
with it crawling.
Gray's tree frog. And I would have done that. It's a small pond, about maybe 15-20 minute drive from my house. I used to have 3 ponds right behind my home. Behind my home, there's a 40-acre field. And when we moved here, we've been here at the house 25 years. When we moved here, the field had just been laying fallow, and 3 low depressions would create vernal ponds every spring, and the frogs would just show up in the thousands breeding. So I was able to just go into the field behind the house and do a lot.
Wow.
But about 6-7 years ago, someone had purchased the land. They plowed it under, put drainage tiles in, and now they're working the land again. So
Yeah. So
those
those sort of
opportunities are
opportunities
gone.
are
So
gone.
I've sort of
Yeah.
had to go further afield.
Yeah.
But when I do these, the frogs breeding, I wear a pair of chest waders and I get right in the pond. Usually you're only in about, maybe 6 inches of water anyway, but it allows you to get down low at the
Yeah.
frog's level. And for this guy, I was actually, my elbows were on the bottom of the pond so I could get, right down low. He was on a little
Soggy
stick.
elbows then.
Yeah. Get right down to sort of shoot up a little bit at him.
Yeah.
And then you get some of the cattails, grasses in the background for a bit of interest as well.
Yeah. One thing that struck me about stuff, particularly the things you've done with the amphibians, is this sort of low point of view, creating this intimacy. And I bang on about this quite a lot, with with some of the other discussions I've had with people, is that it's a very important thing to create this intimacy for the viewer,
Yeah.
and the only way you generally achieve that is by getting low. So that does mean getting filthy, dirty, and
Yep.
wet, and being uncomfortable,
Yeah,
because it's the only way
absolutely.
you can do it. And actually, a neoprene pair of chest waders is a really good investment.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
you know, for all sorts of things, for for water birds, for whatever. But do be careful when you're using them. Don't get because if you get out of your depth and they fill up with water, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even some of the frog ponds, I've had some where, I've sunk well into my calves in the muck,
Yeah,
and then I'm out in the pond by myself, and I got to kind of wiggle out of there or else I'm going to be stuck there
exactly.
for a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah, you got to be careful, but
Yeah.
waders are really a valuable
Yeah.
a valuable piece of kit.
Yeah.
But
And then, of course, this was at night, so I used a flash, and I use a small little flashlight for focusing by.
yeah,
This was with the Laowa macro lens as well.
yeah.
And
I mean,
then just some polystyrene foam sheeting to diffuse the flash on
that
this picture
again
here.
is again is a really important tip for people. I think with flash, it to remove those sort of the harshness of it.
Yeah.
Just simple little tips like that. It's cheap things that packaging material that you
Yeah.
have with stuff that you buy online.
Yeah.
You can use to help
Yeah.
diffuse these sort of harsh
Yeah.
lights.
Yeah.
And again, I guess sort of flash photography in wildlife, well, there's a controversial subject if ever you wanted one. Um,
Mhm.
but what would be your advice in terms of approach to using flash in these sorts of circumstances, when to use it, when not to use it? Because one of the things I like about your approach, and one of the things you say on your website, is that basically the environment and the subject has to come first, and its welfare is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So with flash photography and your approach, when do you think it's, when in your own mind you think, oh, that's kind of acceptable, and then I'm not going to do it in this circumstance because I think it might be too intrusive? Is that a sort of, is that just an instinctive thing that, or do you assess each situation?
I've never seen it to really bother frogs. Doesn't seem to bother insects.
No, insects are fine generally, aren't
Um,
they? Yeah.
I have noticed though, if I've sometimes used it with snakes, you will see the snake kind of flinch when the light goes
Mm,
off.
yeah.
So in those situations, I wouldn't use flash because it's obviously having a negative impact on the
Yeah.
subject. I've never used flash for birds. Um, I think with digital photography, maybe you don't quite need to use as much digital with birds. You can always open the shadows a touch.
Yeah.
Um, but with the frogs at night, you definitely need the flash. And like I said, I've never seen it bother them because they'll sit there and they will just keep calling and calling while I'm
Yeah.
there.
So
And
it's
after,
experience, I guess, with
yeah,
with your subject, and it's I think this sort of gets back to the importance of knowing a subject again, and with your interest in nature, then you understand the animal, and when you
yeah,
understand the
yeah,
animal and its behavior, then it's easier for you to portray that in a photograph,
yeah.
and that's what makes the photograph connect with people,
Hmm.
because it your understanding of the animal and its behavior is coming across in the way
Yeah,
you've taken the
yeah,
image. And I think that's an important thing. I mean, fieldcraft, never underestimate it, because it's probably one of the most important things in wildlife photography or nature photography. Fieldcraft,
yeah, yeah,
knowing the subject. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And especially like doing the frogs with their vocal sacs out, the more you know, observe them in the field, you can figure out pretty well exactly when they're going to, call and puff out that vocal sac. A lot of times the body will start to fill up a little bit with air as they're getting ready to
Yeah,
sing. And then some of them, like the grazed tree frog, it's quite rhythmic. So it's very easy to time when to press the shutter to catch that vocal sac
yeah,
open.
yeah. Absolutely. So Lawrence Doherty says some ponds have got really deep silt. Yeah, they have. Be careful. The good tip actually is to get a sort of long pole
Yeah.
and poke it down before you start stepping on these areas, because you don't want to find that all of a sudden you slip down too far, you can't get out, and the worst thing to happen really is for the water to come up over the top of the
Hmm.
waders and it get filled with water. You're really in trouble then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, do be very careful
Yeah.
if you're going to start doing that sort of thing. Um, Rachel Piper's got a question, and in fact, this is an interesting one because this is something I've seen quite a lot of as well. So Rachel says, I photographed a frog mating with a toad last week. Is this a common occurrence? So I guess, we don't get many species in the UK, as you'll probably know, Andrew.
Mhm.
So we effectively, all I ever see are common frogs and common
Right.
toads.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the European toad and the European frog.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people will know that sort of watch these lives that I run the local toad patrol. So we're picking them up off the road
Okay. Yeah.
because we've
Good.
got a breeding pond in the village. So
Mhm.
we've just finished actually because the clocks have just gone forward in the
Okay.
UK.
Yeah.
So we're now on British summertime. And
Yeah.
it's that point that I normally say to everybody, no, it's no point in continuing anymore.
Right.
So we've picked up, I don't know, I think about 1,800 animals this year, something like that.
Wow. Yeah.
But I've come across in that pond because there are a lot more frogs this year than there have been in previous years, because I record
Mhm.
the data every year, which
Okay.
reminds
Good.
me I must send it to Frog Life.
Yeah.
And I've noticed a lot more frogs this year, and I've seen this behavior as well, where they're getting confused, and I think
Mhm.
that's probably the answer to the question.
I
Yes,
think so. Yeah.
it's quite common. I just think they get confused.
Yeah. The hormones are going too crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we came up with, we were having fun coming up with good names for the hybrids. But,
Mhm.
anyway,
Yeah. No, because I've had common, like the American toad, which is here, very similar to your common toad. When they're full breeding, the males will grab males. If you put your finger in
Mm.
front of them, they'll grab onto your finger. They're
Yeah,
just,
absolutely.
it's like if anything touches them, they think it's something to mate with and they grab it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I've had males on males, and you're right. They're just sort of grabbing onto anything they can
Yeah. Yeah.
at various points. But yeah,
Yeah.
okay, fantastic. Right, let's see what you've got next. And talking of underwater stuff, so what have we got? Is it a stonefish?
Yes.
So
Stonefish or spotted scorpion fish is another name for them. Yeah.
yeah, and you were saying, oh, this is a tradition, Andrew. You've probably seen it. Anyway, it's that time of the
Ah,
evening here.
okay. I just
Probably
got
a bit
water, but
early for you
cheers.
still. Anyway,
Mm.
cheers. Cheers, everybody. Sorry, you were saying this because this is what Cayman Islands.
Yeah, this is actually
Yeah,
on Cayman Brac, the furthest east of the three islands, with a Nikon D800 and the 18 to 35 millimeter lens inside the Ewa Marine housing. And he was probably in about 8 feet of water. They camouflage incredibly well. A lot of times when you find one, you try to get a few pictures. And I do this just snorkeling. I'm not scuba diving for these pictures at this time. So I'd have to go back up for air. And then when, you look around to find him again, you got to take a few minutes to try and find out where he is again, because they're just so well camouflaged.
yeah. Well, you're good at picking things out like that, aren't you? Going back to your running crab spot.
Yeah.
But
But for this one, these guys, when they're on the bottom, I find it's kind of hard to snorkel down and get yourself on the bottom to look through the viewfinder for the
well, because
pictures. So
presumably you haven't got weighted belt or anything because you're
no,
snorkeling.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes it's kind of just shooting blind. The lens is on its the widest at 18 millimeters, and then just go down and put the camera right on the bottom, pointed towards the fish, and then fire off a series of frames, and then I'll go back up for a breath of air and see what I got. And if I didn't get it, then I would go back down again and try for some more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Amazing.
some of these ones, it's a little bit hit and miss when they're on the bottom in that deep of water.
Yeah, it's
But
incredible. I mean, I thought I just naturally assumed you'd be scuba diving for this rather than snorkeling. But
yeah, no,
it's
this was
a great
snorkeling.
effort.
I am certified for scuba diving, but we only got in 2 or 3 dives, and then COVID started and we
COVID.
didn't get into it.
Yeah,
So we'll need to do a refresher before we
yeah.
go back in now. But
So interesting to see you're still shooting with the 800, the Nikon D800.
I do still have it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Me too.
I prefer to use the D500 underwater right now,
Mm.
but when I get a housing, I will get a housing for the Z7.
Yeah.
And
So you're shooting Z7, D500, and D800.
D800, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I originally thought I would convert the D800 to an infrared camera, but I may just keep it as a backup. color camera instead and just have it
Yeah.
around.
I mean,
So.
I sort of touched on this, I think, in the last live that we did about, I've been thinking about doing a sort of live on wildlife photography on a budget, because it's so expensive
Hmm.
to get into wildlife photography, or that's what people assume, because well, let's face it, some of those sort of 500, 600 mil lens, the price of a car.
Yeah.
um and when you're looking at things like the Nikon Z9 at what, 5.5
Hmm.
US, well, it's about 5.5 grand here, as
Yeah.
in pounds, so that
Yeah.
it's more expensive here,
Hmm.
arguably. um by the time you've got the adapter for the mount, and by the time you've by the time you've bought the cards that actually make use of its amazing shutter,
Yeah.
the frame rate,
Yeah.
you're looking at 6,500, 7,000 pounds. I mean, that
Yes.
just
Yeah.
for the camera body, and you haven't even started on the
Hmm.
glass. I mean, that's
Yeah.
very, very daunting. But
Yeah.
I
Then you got to hope
I
you got a computer that can handle the file sizes too.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
yes, and then you've got to buy all this extra storage, and then the
Yeah.
problems mount up. And actually, I think some people need perhaps just to think about, yes, it opens up a whole host of possibilities, but not for everybody. It depends on your style of photography,
Hmm.
and buying a camera for the sake of owning the latest gear isn't a good enough reason for me. I need a camera to do what I want it to do within the budget that I have.
Yeah.
And I'd spent a long time looking at the Z9 thinking, how can I justify that expense? Because how often am I going to use the 20 frames a second in RAW, for
Right.
example?
Yeah.
A very small percentage of my photography would take advantage of that.
Hmm.
So I'm paying a lot of money for a very small proportion of my photography. And that's the way
Yeah.
I look at things. And I think the D800 is a really good example of, if you don't need amazing autofocus, if you
Hmm.
don't need a really fast shutter frame rate, then that's still an amazing piece of kit.
Yeah.
I mean, for sort of landscape stuff or for macro work or whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
you couldn't go far wrong with the D800, and you could pick one of
No.
those up for £400, a decent one now, I would
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. 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 They're
So
about $1,000 Canadian in the used departments here now.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
And
mean,
that'll just come down even further,
oh,
you
it
know.
will. I mean,
Yeah.
I picked up a D850 because I've upgraded from the 800 to a D850, and I
Hmm.
bought one a month or so ago, and I bought a used one. And
Yeah.
when it arrived, it was like new. It didn't have a scratch on it. It had a low
Right.
frame count. Came from a reputable secondhand. Sorry, my dog's barking. She's
That's okay.
it came from a reputable secondhand, dealer, with a warranty and everything else. At I'm not saying a fraction of the cost, but a lot lower than the actual camera new. So I've
Hmm.
saved myself a load of money, and got, so I bought a grip for it and everything. So I've got the capability of doing the 9 frames a second if I want it, but I
Yeah.
did that for like a very, very low price. And anyway,
Hmm.
I could go on about that all night. I told you I talk too much. I said to you at the start, I'm going to try and keep this down to an hour. My problem is I talk too much, so I'm going off subject. Let's see what you got next. So again, back to sort of more the landscape side of things. But again, I just thought this was intriguing because it shows another side of your photography, I think. So tell people about this image, and the circumstances behind it, perhaps the equipment and what have you.
Yeah. Okay. This is another picture done with the Laowa lens.
Mm.
It's with the D800, the Laowa 12 millimeter, zero distortion, and the that sort of dark color of ice in the foreground there. That's probably about 6 inches away from the camera,
Wow.
from the lens, and just shooting vertical to really exaggerate that little sort of inlet in the ice, if you will, on the river. It's a small waterfall in Muskoka, Ontario, about 2 hours north of Toronto. It was a very, very cold day, probably about, I think it was about 25 below Celsius, quite chilly.
Wow.
But when you get those really frigid weather, the ice along these waterfalls and rivers really takes shape and gives you lots of subject matter. And the waterfall is just to um, your right, looking out of the picture. You can see a
Nice.
tiny little bit
Yeah.
of it coming in there. So there was a lot of mist coming off of there. And with those real frigid temperatures, it all just lands on the trees on the far side of the river and just creates a nice
Creates
little
these
winter
lovely sort of
wonderland look.
patterns, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? And I think, you know, that's a really important part of nature photography, or landscape photography in general, is looking for those sort of patterns and textures.
Hmm.
You know, that's what sort of makes the image almost, but it's piecing them together in a way that makes it flow.
Yeah.
So your eye sort of is drawn around the frame, and I think this is, you know, that you've done this beautifully here. I
Thanks.
really love that.
Yeah.
And so Lawrence Doherty says, yeah, love the perspective.
Thank
I
you.
mean, how do you go about assessing, you know, a location? How does your brain work in that way? Do you sort of sit down and take your time over it, and perhaps revisit on a number of occasions, or do these things come to you instantly?
I revisit this one quite often. I do a winter waterfall workshop, and this is one of the ones that we do go to all the time. Um, but just sort of like you sort of said about just stop and look around and see what comes to you. You know, when I first get to the spot, I won't take out, set up the tripod and take the camera out right away. I'll just sort of, put it all down in the snow and just kind of walk around for a little bit and see what's around. In the wintertime, you want to sort of watch where you're stepping, though, because you don't want to ruin your foreground by
Yeah.
stepping all through the snow. But that's, yeah, just sort of I look around and see what's there. A lot of the landscapes, I'll shoot them both horizontal and vertical. So I did do this one in horizontal, but the vertical does work so much better than the
Mm,
horizontal did. But I do that just because of, if sending images to magazines for their want lists and stuff like that. If I have both a vertical and horizontal, I think it's a good idea to send them both, because you never know. One could get used as a cover, one could get used on the interior or something as a
mm,
double page spread or something. So
yeah.
I keep the options open, shooting both perspectives for most landscape scenes.
And presumably have a sort of commercial, you know, you've got this sort of commercial thought in your mind when you're looking at things as well, being, you know, making your living from photography. I know you do a lot of workshops and that sort of thing, but, and we all know how much we don't get these days for selling images,
Yeah, yeah.
but you've still got that sort of commercial brain when you're looking at these situations. Do you take stuff for yourself and then perhaps recompose for a more commercial shot
If I
sometimes?
think the scene is really special, then I may, create a frame that would be more suited to a print,
Yeah.
perhaps. But then if I'm thinking in terms of, if this might make a nice picture for one of the calendar companies, then I'll shoot it just a little bit looser, because a lot of the calendars like to go to a square crop, right?
Mm, yeah.
So give them a little bit of room to crop and still keep the integrity of the composition you were trying for.
I think this is really good advice actually for people that perhaps haven't sold images before. And I said, you know, don't expect to make a fortune at it, because it's just not available anymore, because there's just so much stuff out there. But when you're looking at compositions, it's you have to shoot with those things in mind. You know, you have to shoot with that sort of, oh, if it's going to be for a calendar, they're going to go for a squarer type of crop, just because of the way the calendars are generally tend to be shaped.
Hmm.
When you're looking at a magazine cover, it has to be it has to be a vertical, because that's the way magazines work. Leave some space for a title. Think how an
Hmm.
editor would think. It's, you know, all
Yeah.
those things. You know, if you're serious about, you know, selling a few images, and to be honest, you get more of a buzz from actually seeing it on the front cover than the money that comes into your bank account,
Yeah.
because you know, you might be able to afford a beer out of it, but it won't be
Yeah.
much more than that these days.
Yeah.
um, so you know, you're never going to cover the cost of the trip and the camera really by selling stock anymore.
No. No.
But it's, you know, it's a bit of a buzz. Do
Yeah.
you remember the
Yeah.
first magazine cover you got?
Yeah, it was with a magazine called Canadian Gardening, and it was just it was a macro image of the center of a red dahlia blossom.
Mine was a front cover of, get this, the Hartley Whitney Village magazine. It's a village in Hampshire,
Yeah.
and I I photographed some ladies at like a women's institute style
Hmm.
market, and they used it on the front cover. I
Uh,
was so chuffed. I don't think I got paid, but anyway, that was a few years ago.
yeah. Yeah.
Right, let's see what we've got next, because we've got a couple more left, I think.
Mhm.
So I just thought this was so interesting because there must be a real story behind this. And again, this is sort of going back to the macro work
Yeah,
and going from something sort of fairly sort of monochrome back through to the color
yeah,
and closer up in a whole different sort of genre. Um, I just thought that sort of that mix was quite nice, but there's something going on here, and I'd like to know a little bit more about this, and I'm sure you'll be able to enlighten me.
yeah. Well, once I started getting into more macro and just walking along the rural road by my house, I would find a lot of these little these are jagged ambush bugs.
Mm,
I would find a lot of them um, just along the roadside and either on daisies or clover and that type of stuff. And they're quite tiny, maybe 1 centimeter long, so very, very small. There's in this picture here, there's actually two of them. They're mating,
yeah.
and then the female has caught this very large hornet. And the jagged ambush bugs are supposed to be able to take down prey that's about 10 times their
Wow.
size. Their venom is that powerful. I mean, they're harmless to us, but to an insect, their venom is, deadly, and they can overpower things very quickly. These ones here are on a thistle that was growing alongside the road. And what I did is when I walk along the road, I'll usually carry one of those little Wimberley clamps with me. And
Mm,
I got the ground stake, so I'll just stick it in the ground beside it, and then I can just clamp onto the thistle, so any breeze, it's not going to blow around in the wind too much. And then this is again just with my Lawa 100 millimeter 2 times life size on the D500. So when you use it there, you're getting about 150 millimeter lens,
yeah.
which gives you
Yeah.
a little bit, sort of more magnification, a little better working distance. And then dual flash. All my insect work is done with dual flash. It creates a nice even light, and it gets rid of a lot of the harsh
But again,
shadows you can
presumably
sometimes
you've got
get.
some diffusing going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
diffusing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
do not use anything other than diffusers now for that. And actually, what I've been using for the last oh probably 6 7 months, I purchased a diffuser from a fella out in Australia, and it's called a Cygnus Tech diffuser. And I'm not sure, the material is kind of like an acrylic kind of paper
Mm,
almost, but yeah, it works just with a hot shoe mounted flash, which is really nice because you got a nice compact setup. You don't have these great big flash arms anymore.
yeah.
And that,
I think I've seen that sort of folded,
yeah,
in a shape over the front of the lens, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
I think
and
I've seen
they'll
those. Yeah.
collapse flat, so you can easily stick them in like the laptop pocket of a camera bag or something like that. And I think they actually work good for protecting your gear from the rain too, because it's got this nice plastic dome over your
Yeah.
whole setup, and then just a white acrylic sheet that the flash fires through, and it creates beautiful diffusion. I don't have any like flash generated highlights on any of my subjects, whether it's like wet frog skin or the insects. It's just a
Mm,
beautiful diffusion. So I quite like that now, and that's what I use for all my macro work that I use flash with now.
yeah. Fantastic. I mean, going back to what you were saying about these things being able to take down insects that are 9 or 10 times their
Hmm.
size. I mean, a hornet is a pretty formidable
It is,
opponent.
yeah, yeah,
One would think.
yeah.
I just think I'd never heard of these things. I'd never seen this behavior. I mean, obviously, I've seen other insects doing similar things, but
Yeah.
I mean, the size difference it's just isn't nature incredible?
Oh,
And
it
it's
is. Yeah. Yeah.
it's bringing those things into people's living rooms with this sort of photography. I just think is wonderful. I mean, I guess wild art obviously is all about the art of artful photography. I mean, this is perhaps a bit more of a literal shot, but it's telling a story, and I think that in itself is a form of art. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do, and I think there's another thing that judges like is they do like images that tell stories.
Hmm.
And this for me tells a story. I want to know more. I mean, I want to know, are those two things mating? I assume they were, but I didn't know. Is that actually taking down the hornet, or is it the other way round?
Yeah.
There's a whole load of questions that I had when I saw this, and I thought, oh wow, this
Yeah.
just looks so interesting. I assumed that it was the hornet that was having the worst day, but
Yeah.
you can never be sure. So a
Yeah.
fantastic picture.
Yeah. Flowers. And that's like, I never knew we had these till I started walking the road
Yeah,
and actually looking. And, I find so many things like, different types of spiders, these ambush bugs. Flowers are a great spot to look
yeah,
for,
exactly.
insects, whether it's butterflies or predator type insects.
And again, it's taking your time and looking really closely, and it's amazing what appears. I do this with fungi. Sometimes I'll walk through a woodland and I go,
Mhm.
"Ah, there's no fungi around. That's a shame." And then you'll sit down, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's a small one here, and there's a little. Oh, and then you start looking, you think, "Oh no,
Yeah.
there's loads of it around." I was just walking past it with closed eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and a lot of these sort of fungi shots that you'll see, the things themselves, they're tiny, they're
Hmm.
minuscule, but of course the way they're shot makes them look big.
Yeah.
But anyway, Andrew, we're on to your final image, so let's
Okay.
see what we've got for that. And so this is the one, obviously, I used for the thumbnail to advertise the
Yeah. Yeah.
the live. I just loved the lighting and the perspective, and I love the way you picked it out. With going for a darker background. I mean,
Mhm.
that's one of my favorite things to do. Actually, is to underexpose backgrounds and pick things out with, well, normally natural light, and it's normally with me it's things like birds, but
Mhm.
and so using that technique to isolate subjects is one of my favorites. But I think I just love. I love the position of the web here, and I love the sort of delicacy of it all, and the position of the spider and the colors, and I just think it's, again, it tells a story. So tell people a little bit about this image. I mean, and the species, and
It's an orchard orb weaver. Not very big. The abdomen is probably about I'm going to say a quarter inch or smaller.
mm,
So it's not too big.
it's a small
Yeah.
animal. Yeah,
Yeah. And it was just in my yard, just along the in sort of between some shrubs, a bit of an opening, and just had the web in the opening of the shrubs. And I tried photographing it a few times, but getting in, close enough with my setup, if a flash bumped the web, then spider was gone. So then I'd have to wait for it to
yeah,
come back out again, try again. And so I ended up going with this side view. I just sort of like the way it sort of separated the spider from the web, instead of, looking at the spider like on down on it, or
yeah.
on the
That's
like
what I like
on the
about it,
web. So
and
just you can
and
see
and,
it
and I think
hanging
I
in the
think
web.
and I think you've used some sort of landscape techniques here as well in terms of composition. The sort of thirds, and
Hmm.
and sort of breaking, and the way the web goes into one corner, and yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a cracking image,
And
and
that was with the
lighting it was what with the
dual flash
yeah.
and the Laowa 100 millimeter macro lens on the D500.
Yeah, I've got a question for you later. One of my closing questions. I think I know what the answer is already to this. The number of images that have
Eh,
featured that lens, but yeah, I think this is there are, well, I think Rachel's still on. I'm assuming she still is. Rachel Piper. She knows a thing or two about spiders webs. You'll remember Rachel's
mhm.
spider web in abstracts.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure she'll appreciate this one. But,
Mhm.
no,
And
fantastic
the
picture.
black background for this, it more or less came because there wasn't really much behind the web, because we had that little opening in the shrubs, so there was nothing really for the light to fall on.
Mm,
So even, like shooting it in the middle of the day, it comes out as though it was shot in the middle of the night, kind of
yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's another good tip for people. Is some people ask me, how do you achieve the dark backgrounds, and then the subject itself is well lit. I mean, it depends on the situation, but I mean, for me, I do it quite a lot with swans and things like
Hmm.
that. But that's relatively straightforward, because if you've got a white bird that's swimming into a shaft of light, and the background is in shade, you've got such a good dynamic range,
Yeah.
that you can create that in camera relatively easily by underexposing.
Hmm.
Um, and it's knowing what your camera and how your camera reacts in terms of metering,
Exactly. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
knowing the sort of dynamic range of it, and getting to know your equipment is the way that you
Yeah.
create those images, because you just know it's going to happen. I mean, I can just
Yes. Yeah.
predict it. You see something, you go, right, okay,
Yeah.
and a lot of the times it might be, say, 3 stops under, and people go,
Hmm.
that much? You go, oh yeah, you know, because you have to really generate that separation. But because you've got such contrast in the dynamic range between a white bird and a shaded
Hmm.
background, you can get away with it, and you can
Yeah.
use it to your advantage. And it works the other way around, of course. Um,
Yeah.
but
And I think
that's what.
that's important. Like you said, knowing what your camera sensor is capable of,
Hmm,
because even, you know, clipping highlights, when you look at the histogram, in my D500, I can clip the highlights quite a bit and recover all that
yeah,
detail. So really knowing how to, and if you can recover that detail with the clipped highlights showing on the back of the camera, then you're probably going to end up with a better exposed picture than if you create a picture on the LCD screen with zero highlights clipped.
yeah,
So it's knowing what you can do with your sensor as well to
yeah,
maximize the
and exactly,
information
and
for the photo.
how those raw files act when you get them into, you know, post processing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
how far you can push them around. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, when we're talking about competition photography, if you're pushing files around too much, then you're sort of, you know, you're flirting with rules
Hmm.
and crossing those lines. But you know, if you're taking stuff for you, and or you're taking stuff commercially or whatever it is, then you know those sorts of things don't matter. And I think most people, yes, of course, you know, they're interested in wild art photography. Yeah, that's why we're all here after all. However, you know, not every image those people, you know, everybody out there is taking is going to be a competition image. You know, you
No.
just do photography for you, and that's if
Yeah.
you get a, you know, you get a something you think will do well in a competition, then you have to look at the processing carefully, make sure that you don't infringe any rules. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think taking photography for yourself is the most important thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a fantastic selection of images. I'm going to remind you, because I do have something I sent you anyway, just to show you what I'd picked. So those are the 10 images that we've shared tonight. And I think, you know, as we said at the beginning, that just really shows the diverse nature of you as a photographer and your skill set. Um, the radio show goes at the end, they ask people to choose out of the 8 tracks that they've chosen which one they would save above all else from the waves on this imaginary desert island. Which one of those images would you save from these imaginary waves if you had a choice out of those 10?
Probably the gray tree frog.
Yeah,
I've shot them, thousands and thousands of time, but that picture is the one that it stands out as my favorite of all the gray tree frog pictures I've done over time.
great. The grey trig frog has it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me stop sharing that screen. I've got a couple more questions to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah.
But so again, the radio show goes. They get a copy of the Bible, a complete works of Shakespeare, and then they get to choose a book of their choice to take with them. So my alternatives are that, you know, I'm going to give you your camera body, the one you use most, a 50mm lens, and then you get to take a lens of your choice. So which lens would you take?
Probably the 100 macro.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
knew you were going to say that. And they also get a luxury item. So it's going to have to be a luxury item of camera equipment. What would your luxury item be on this desert island of yours?
Oh, flash diffuser maybe to go with.
Okay, it's yours.
Yep.
Great stuff. Andrew, it's been really good to talk to you. I hope people have enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed talking to you and sharing all those amazing images.
Thanks.
We're going to do a few more of these because I think it's just a nice fun thing to do, and actually it's quite informative for people because they get to they get an insight into you as a photographer and your approach, you know, to photography, and hopefully there's sort of some hints and tips that they can pick up on. But do go and have a look at Andrew's website, everybody, because it's, you know, there's some really nice stuff on there, some really
Yeah.
interesting articles, as I was mentioning, the reflection pond blog that you did. So do go and have a look at your Andrew's website, because there's lots of nice stuff on there. So just a couple of comments coming in to finish up. Rachel Piper says, definitely love it. I think she's talking about the spider, of course. And then she also says, amazing work. Would love some advice regarding my trip. So, well, I tell you what, if you're all right with that, Andrew, I'll put you two in touch.
Yeah, I was going to say, if she shot me an email with
Yeah.
the times that she's going to be there, then yeah, Rachel, I can put together a little list of stuff that you might find useful.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll put you two in touch via email, and you can talk about it. So yeah, brilliant. Well, it's nice to be able to connect people like this. So Scott Vincent says, nice interview, Rob. Great work, Andrew. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Hope you enjoyed it. Alan James says, thanks, Rob and Andrew. No, it's an absolute pleasure. And Lawrence Doherty, thanks, guys. Great chat. Well, that's what we're here to do. I said the next one will be Monday. I think so Monday. It's the 10th of March with Peter Bambusek, I think. I said we just swapped emails today, so that's sort of shaping up. I'll let everybody know about that. Then we're going to do the winners announcement for Light on the 17th of April with Georgina. So that's 2 weeks today, I think. And then I've got the next Desert Island Pics is with Kurum Khan. And that's on the 24th of April. So I'm busy with these lives this month. And then on the 8th of May, I'm going to be talking to Rebecca Nason about human nature, which is a new category we've got for this year. And I thought we'd do that early because it gives people, enough time to start thinking about, entries for that category. So, and I think we might talk to Rachel about the new OM one as well. Because she's got that, and I probably will form part of the conversation with Peter as well, because I know he's had that for a few months now too. So anyway, if anybody's interested in knowing a little bit about the OM1, which of course is the part of the prize for the best portfolio. So they've, Olympus or OM System, I have to keep calling them that now, have come up with an amazing prize for that best portfolio. So as I said, that's worth about £4,000. So that's well worth winning. Even if you're not an Olympus or OM shooter, that is a really good second system to have. Georgina Statler won that similar thing, and she won, I think it was, I can't remember which camera body it was now, but with Bird Photographer of the Year, she won their best portfolio one year, and she got the OM, I can't remember, anyway, she's got one of the Olympus camera bodies, EM1, the EM1 Mark II, I think it was, and then a 300mm lens, which is a 600mm equivalent, being micro four thirds, and the 1.4 times converter. And she tells me that she takes that out more often than her Canon stuff because it's just lighter. So she runs that as a second system. So that's a really good prize, well worth it. Anyway, I'm digressing. Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
It's been really great to talk to you. Hang on the line for a second. We'll have a quick chat afterwards.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming on and sharing all those beautiful images.
Thank
with
you,
us.
much appreciated. Yeah.
And I'll just remove you from and say goodbye. But hang on the line. We'll have a chat afterwards. I'll do a quick outro, and we'll catch up afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thanks.
Okay. Right, let me just get to the right place because I need to play an outro. There we are. So I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed talking to Andrew. What a great guy. Don't forget, next Monday is the next live with Peter Bambusek, I think. I'll confirm that with everybody probably in the next day or so. And then we've got a whole series of things like, as we talked about a minute ago. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that. And we'll see you again next time.